Welcome to World Gone Weird, where we try to make sense of, well, everything. Or at least, try to make a little bit of sense.
Yeah, sense might be a strong word. We just kind of poke at the weirdness and see what crawls out.
Exactly. We're just exploring the landscape of the strange.
And by exploring, you mean we're going to collectively throw darts at a map of chaos and then argue about where they land.
Pretty much. So, let's dive right in, shall we? There are a few things that have been bouncing around the news cycle lately that really highlight the kind of, weirdness we're talking about.
Okay, but before we get too deep, can we just acknowledge that the news itself feels like a weird alternate reality lately? Like, I'm waiting for the "this is a simulation" disclaimer at the end of every broadcast.
I know, right? It's like reality is being written by a committee that can't agree on the plot. But that said, I'm kind of looking forward to figuring out this week's strange happenings.
Oh, I'm sure it will be a laugh riot, like watching a clown car crash into a dumpster fire. But a dumpster fire filled with intrigue, naturally.
Okay, let's start with this one then. Something that's really been bothering me this week. We have Trump suggesting, and I quote, that we clean out Gaza and move Palestinians to Jordan and Egypt. Like what?
Okay, now hold on a second. I think there's something here to unpack. It's not like he's just waking up and saying move them. He's talking about a very complicated situation. I think this whole thing about the Palestinians being pushed around is something the global community should have focused on decades ago, instead of pretending it doesn't exist, or that they are just innocent victims, right?
I see what you're saying, Jimmy, but the idea of just forcibly relocating 1.5 million people, it's a logistical and ethical nightmare, not to mention the potential human rights catastrophe this could create. I mean, where are they going to go? How are they going to rebuild their lives?
Yeah, I mean, just call a moving company, right? Okay, Jordan, you're up. Load those refugees onto the truck, please, and try not to misplace any children, thanks. It's like some kind of twisted game of geopolitical musical chairs.
Exactly, Sarah. It's the lack of any scientific or rational basis for this. I mean, where's the feasibility study? Where's the plan? How do you just clean out an area with that many people? And what about the historical and cultural context? These aren't chess pieces you can just move around the board. This isn't about some logistical hurdle, it's about human beings.
But Jesus, isn't that the entire problem? That people are looking at it like it is just a logistics problem and not considering the human aspect? Maybe Trump is trying to find a solution, however unconventional, where people aren't just stuck in the crossfire. Maybe it is a bad idea, but at least he is doing something instead of just letting them suffer.
I see your point, Jimmy, but doing something can sometimes be worse than doing nothing, especially when it's such a massive undertaking with potentially catastrophic outcomes. We have to think about the long-term consequences. What kind of message does that send to the global community about international law and the rights of refugees?
Oh, I'm sure they'll all be incredibly grateful to be shipped off to new, unfamiliar lands. And I'm sure they'll find all the comforts of home, except, their actual homes. Maybe they can have a group sing-along of "There's No Place Like Home" for old time's sake, right?
And the fact that this is being seen as a boost by the far right in Israel, it's beyond troubling. It shows that this isn't about finding a humane solution. It's about a land grab, about power, and about completely disregarding human lives.
Okay, but is it really about a land grab, or could it be about creating a safe space for people who have been caught in an endless cycle of conflict? And let's not forget, Hamas is a big part of this problem. They aren't exactly helping.
Well, yes, Hamas is absolutely part of the problem, but the people of Gaza, the civilians, they're not Hamas. They're caught in the middle, and that's part of my point. We have to look at long-term solutions and not just quick, easy fixes that might make the situation even worse.
It's also that this is part of a larger problem, right? We're seeing this pattern of just ignoring complexities in favor of these simplistic, ultimately inhumane solutions. It's like we've completely abandoned any sense of critical thinking and empathy. It's just all about power and control, and not what's actually best for the people involved. And the best is also subjective to what you value.
I think we have to consider that there might not be any perfect solutions, Jesus. The situation is messy and complicated. Sometimes you need drastic action to break a cycle, and I think that's what Trump might be attempting to do, however poorly it might sound. And frankly, I think some other nations who are not involved should step up and do their part. This isn't just an Israeli/Palestinian problem. It's a global problem.
And yet, maybe the better way forward is, instead of pushing all these people from their homes, it's creating a space for them to rebuild in their homes. What could the world be like if countries focused on supporting these people rather than kicking them out? It could create more stability and long-term solutions. I'm sure there are a few organizations who would love to get involved, and it'd be a much better solution if there were just enough financial resources to go around.
Oh, I'm sure that all the warring factions will sit down and discuss their differences over tea and crumpets. It's that easy. Just give everyone a hug and the conflict magically disappears. Why didn't anyone ever think of this before? We'll all be singing Kumbaya by next week.
Okay, let's take a step back, because this idea of forcibly displacing people isn't just about Gaza. It's part of a bigger picture of this disregard for international law, this erosion of human rights. And this idea of cleaning out, it's just dehumanizing, right? It's a way of not acknowledging the complexity, the history, and the trauma that's involved in this conflict. It's also how certain people justify doing some really terrible things.
I agree that dehumanizing language is never good, but what about the dehumanizing acts committed by Hamas? I don't see a lot of condemnation for them. I don't see people marching in the streets for their victims. Why do people ignore that side of the conflict?
And that's true, Jimmy. Violence is violence, and all human suffering is worth condemnation, regardless of who the perpetrator is. It seems like when we ignore the suffering, even if it comes from a group we disagree with, that's when we're in trouble. It's when empathy fails that the real problems begin.
Oh, so everyone's bad? How insightful. So we're all just walking dumpster fires with weapons. I guess we should all just throw our hands up and say, well, that's humans for you, and then go get a drink, or maybe start a bonfire. Bonfires are nice.
No, Sarah, it's not about everyone's bad. It's about recognizing that there are complex systems in place and that actions have consequences. I mean, we can't just ignore the root causes of these conflicts and pretend that they're just going to magically disappear by shifting people around. And that's what's missing, a scientific look at all of the interconnected factors that create this kind of conflict.
It's not about some magic cure, but science does give us tools to understand these incredibly complex systems, to analyze the interconnected causes of violence, displacement, and political instability. And maybe that better understanding is the first step towards more viable solutions and less violence.
Oh, now we're going to science the heck out of this? I can see the PowerPoint presentations now, all the charts, graphs, and evidence-based solutions. I'm sure that will go over well with everyone who's got their homes bombed and their families killed. Let's just make it extra complicated with science.
No, Sarah, it's not about overcomplicating things. It's about actually looking at things critically, not just reacting emotionally. For example, consider the actual logistics of moving 1.5 million people. How many trucks? Where will they live? What resources will they need? The environmental impacts even. These are real questions, and these are based on data and research.
Okay, but what is your solution, Jesus? If moving them is bad, what's the alternative? Let's hear some evidence-based science that isn't just complaining about something that someone else has put out there.
See, that's what I'm talking about. It's a mess, and there are no easy answers, Jesus. I think that it's more about reacting to the situation instead of this armchair quarterbacking. I'm not saying it's the best thing, but I do wonder what we would do in that kind of position, with that kind of responsibility.
Maybe one of the answers is to try and de-escalate the situation. What if the world powers actually tried to cooperate on providing humanitarian aid rather than just engaging in political posturing? What if we focused on supporting sustainable development and community building in those areas? Isn't there a world where we can make space for all people to exist without violence?
Oh, that's such a lovely idea, Otto. It's almost utopian. Why not give everyone a rainbow and a unicorn while we're at it? The only thing the world powers cooperate on is finding ways to control people and enrich themselves. But maybe a unicorn or two might be nice, I guess. I am sure there is a market for a sparkly, war-ready unicorn or two.
And that's the thing, right? We're talking about a level of complexity that demands not just a reaction, but an understanding of the systems, the historical context, the political dynamics, and, frankly, the human cost. And this isn't just isolated to Gaza, right? This mentality is reflected in the next thing I wanted to touch on. The Israeli military allegedly killing 15 people in southern Lebanon on the day they were supposed to withdraw. How does that solve anything?
Well, it does show that there's a lack of trust on both sides. The Israelis are saying that Hezbollah hasn't pulled back enough, and that the Lebanese military isn't doing its job. Maybe there is more going on than what's being said. There's a lot of potential for both sides to posture and gain the advantage over the other.
And that's the heart of the problem, isn't it? This lack of trust, this cycle of violence. We have a ceasefire agreement, which is a positive step, and then something like this happens and everything gets thrown into question. The loss of life is just devastating. And it's not only about the people who died, but all the families, all the communities, all the lives impacted by violence. It's a reminder of how easily these conflicts escalate.
So basically, everyone is just bad at following rules and everyone dies. Sounds like my Tuesday mornings. Maybe we should hand out participation trophies. That will fix everything. At least then everyone could feel good, right?
It's not just about not following rules. It's about the underlying factors that lead to a breakdown in trust and the failure of diplomacy. It's about the complex relationship between historical grievances, political power plays, and the role of external actors. And this isn't an isolated event. We see this cycle of violence and mistrust repeat in so many situations around the world. These are all interconnected systems, and it needs to be recognized.
But, Jesus, you have to understand that realpolitik exists, right? It's not all about doing what's ideal. Sometimes you have to react. You have to be forceful. If Hezbollah isn't pulling back and you have Israeli soldiers trying to keep the peace, it's a dangerous situation. I don't think it's as simple as they didn't follow the rules.
But isn't that the problem, Jimmy? This endless cycle of reacting and being forceful? I mean, when does it end? Where's the long-term strategy for peace? It's easy to talk about force, but the cost of that force is always borne by the people who have no power. The people on the ground trying to return to their homes.
So what? We need more hugs, group therapy sessions with everyone in the world, talking about their feelings and why they are not being nice. Maybe we should hand out participation medals. The more we talk, the more confused I get. Maybe we should just watch some cat videos or something. At least then we all can agree on something. Cats are nice.
It's not that it is simple, or that the solution is hugs, Sarah, but we have to look for ways to create trust, to foster dialogue, and to move beyond this cycle of violence. And if we look at it through the lens of systems and cycles, we have a chance at finding a solution. And to do that, we need to look at all of the data and all of the perspectives and understand how one small change can affect everything else.
But is that realistic? With so many different sides, so many different agendas? It's hard to see any of that happening without some kind of heavy-handed intervention, and I don't think that dialogue will ever truly cut it in that part of the world.
But what's the alternative, Jimmy? An endless cycle of conflict and violence. Surely we can't believe that's the only option. We have to keep striving for a different outcome. Every conflict is an opportunity to try and understand the needs of the people and what is causing the conflict itself. And isn't that an evidence-based approach?
Now, see, this is something I've been saying all along. The lack of transparency from China, the fact that they've been hiding the real origin for this whole pandemic. And what about the research that was going on there? It was funded by us. This is a big problem.
I think we should approach this with caution, Jimmy. Just because the CIA has changed its stance, it doesn't mean it's the absolute truth. Remember all the other agencies that still support the zoonotic theory. I think it is important to recognize that there are always limitations to scientific findings, and political motivations play a huge role in this situation as well. We shouldn't just accept what anyone says at face value.
Oh, so now the CIA is a reliable source of information? I am sure they never make any mistakes. Maybe they should go back to being an intelligence agency and less a political messaging agency. I'm just saying, the shifting narratives surrounding COVID origins remind me of a badly written soap opera.
It's not that they're reliable, Sarah. It's that the very fact the CIA is changing its tune without citing specific new evidence is the thing that's concerning here. The fact is that politics are involved, and that they want to make this shift. Knowing that a different administration might want to reverse it shows that this isn't about science or transparency, and that is really concerning.
But, Jesus, isn't it concerning that the Chinese Communist Party isn't being transparent? What are they hiding? Why don't they want us to know where COVID-19 originated? Is that not a reasonable question to ask after all this time?
Of course, it's reasonable to want transparency, Jimmy. But we also need to acknowledge that this whole situation has become incredibly politicized. And by focusing on one side, aren't we ignoring the actual steps needed to ensure this does not happen again? Transparency, investigation. That can't just be a matter of politics. We need to approach this like a science-based problem and all that comes with it. It doesn't matter where it started. It matters that we are prepared for the next time.
It's not about trusting blindly, Sarah. It's about critically evaluating all the information. The fact that the CIA, an intelligence agency, is now backing this lab leak theory without any concrete new evidence raises questions about the motivations behind that change. Why now? Why this particular assessment? And does this impact the validity of the process?
Okay, but if the lab leak theory is true, isn't it essential that we hold China accountable? Shouldn't there be consequences for that? Should there be an investigation to the lab in question?
Of course, we need accountability, Jimmy. But that accountability needs to be based on credible evidence and sound science, not just on political posturing. And how do we create an investigation that is both thorough and unbiased? And if we are talking about responsibility, let's also talk about our own, right? What was our involvement? What were the impacts of US research funding? How can we ensure this never happens again?
Oh, so we're all bad now? Everyone gets a gold star for being horrible? I am sure that will solve all of the problems. Maybe we should just have an international blame game Olympics? I'd pay good money to watch that. And maybe while we are at it, we can all just point fingers at each other and feel really good about ourselves.
It's not about blame, Sarah. It's about understanding the systems that allowed this to happen. It's about looking at the scientific data, the potential for human error, and the risks inherent in certain kinds of research, right? It's about looking at how easily political tensions affect science and how to better isolate science from those effects. I mean, this whole situation highlights the need for robust transparency, standardized methodologies, and independent validation of data, regardless of who the players are. This is all incredibly complicated, and yet we still see governments making sweeping changes with little to no real evidence. And if we keep ignoring the complexities, then we are doomed to repeat this again and again.
But what if the Chinese government is intentionally hiding something? What if they are responsible? Do we just sit back and do nothing?
No, Jimmy, we don't do nothing. We engage in critical investigation. We push for transparency. We make sure the international community is working together to ensure something like this doesn't happen again. And we do that based on evidence and reason, not on conspiracy theories and knee-jerk reactions. We need to stop reacting and start addressing the root causes.
It's not about becoming a scientist, Sarah. It's about engaging in critical thinking, about demanding evidence, and about understanding the interconnectedness of these events. And the big picture here is that these events, from Gaza to Lebanon to COVID, they're not isolated incidents. They're all part of the same broken system, a system that prioritizes power and control over human well-being and rational understanding. We're seeing an increasing disregard for facts, a lack of empathy, and a willingness to ignore the consequences of our actions. I mean, everything is so interconnected. The political, the financial, the scientific. It's all one big global mess. And until we recognize that, we're going to keep repeating the same patterns over and over.
Well, I'm not sure what the solution is then, Jesus. It's easy to complain about things, and it is easy to analyze, but it's a whole different thing to actually come up with solutions that work. And frankly, sometimes I feel like we're all just talking in circles.
Oh, we are all just going to understand our way out of this mess? That sounds about as effective as using a spork to dig a swimming pool. And you know what? I'm hungry again. Anyone else want a snack? Because it seems like all of these world problems could be solved with a nice chocolate cake.
Yeah, I guess we'll just have to keep poking at the weirdness and see what happens next week. Maybe next time we should just talk about cats.
And maybe, if we focus on what we can do to create positive change, we'll see a positive impact, no matter how small. And hey, I'm totally up for cats next time. They're pretty amazing, especially when they are not destroying my furniture.
Yeah, I'm just going to go contemplate the meaning of existence over a bowl of cereal. Or maybe I'll finally get that bonfire going. Who knows? Until next time, folks.